Und herzlich willkommen zur Österreich-Premiere von Ithaka, dem Film. Das ist eine Veranstaltung heute vom österreichischen Journalistinnenclub, vom Burgkino Wien, vom Team der Candles für Assange, Mahnwache Wien und von normale.at. Da komme ich her. Mein Name ist Barbara Waschmann und gemeinsam mit meinen Kolleginnen Marie-Odile Dorer und Barbara Meister werden wir heute durchs Programm führen. Ich habe auch die große Freude, heute anzukündigen, zwei Gäste zum Filmgespräch. Richard Medhurst ist bereits hier. Richard Medhurst ist Journalist und politischer Kommentator und John Shipton, der Vater von Julian Assange, wird im Laufe des Films zu uns kommen. Und ich möchte gerne Richard Medhurst gleich bitten, ein paar Worte einleitend zu sagen. Ich habe gehört, du hast eine neue Nachricht von Stella Assange mitgebracht.
Hello everybody, good evening ladies and gentlemen. So thank you Barbara and the Austrian Journalists Club, the Burkino, Reporters Without Borders, John Shipton and everybody for organizing this event so we can watch Ithaka. It's a very important movie. I was just with John right now. We were giving an interview to FM4, so that's part of ORF. We did it in English, and we just spoke a bit about this political persecution against Julian. And now you'll get to see the personal side of it, what it's like for the family. And it's a very important film because there's a lot of demonization, persecution against Assange, and they try to make him not human. They try to dehumanize him to attack his work. So it's very important that you see this and see the whole persecution and prosecution in context. I just wanted to read to you a quick statement from Julian's wife, Stella Assange. She said, so this is from today at 2 p.m. She says, quote, "Julian's health is deteriorating for every day that he remains in prison. It will soon be 4 years. Every day Julian is suffering in Belmarsh. Today is day 8 of Julian being locked in his cell 24 hours a day due to testing positive for COVID-19. He first tested positive on Saturday a week ago. The brutality of his treatment is beyond words. In spite of this, his spirit is strong and energized by the massively growing support by the fact that the European Parliament has selected him to be a finalist for the Sakharov Prize this year by over 7,000 people forming a human chain wrapping around the British Parliament 1 week ago, and at similar public spaces around the world. We need to continue to raise the political profile of this case until it is impossible for the United Kingdom and the United States to go through with this unspeakable travesty." Enjoy the film. Thank you very much.
Can we talk about your contact with Julian through his childhood? It's part of the story, I think.
It isn't part of the story.
Yeah.
The story is that, I'm attempting in my own modest way to get Julian out of the ship.
Julian Assange is the hero of our time.
He was the darling of the left. All of a sudden, he's a puppet of Russia.
My name is John Shipton. I'm Julian Assange's father.
WikiLeaks found that Julian Assange has been arrested.
One of the most notorious and controversial figures in custody.
Assange will remain behind bars until that extradition hearing, which has been set down for the end of February.
I urge the Department of Justice to drop the charges.
The maximum jail sentence of 175 years.
Because he published the truth.
How does it feel to be the father of such a controversial figure, somebody who's known around the world?
Was that him on the phone before?
Yeah.
What are you talking about on a kind of regular basis?
If Julian is extradited to the United States to face these charges, he will be the first, but not the last.
What are your worst fears?
That it just collapses under the strain.
It looks as though what journalists do for a living is seen to be a criminal act.
Shipton, keep it up, man.
Thank you.
I wish I had your energy, I really do.
I'm done. I'm done. I mean, I'm fucking worn out.
Why do you think there's not a great public love and support?
This is really, truly a good question.
What's at stake? If he goes down, so will journalism.
But if people walked away from this film understanding you, how would you feel about that?
We're here, and this has only come about because we have a child in the ship, and we want to get him out.
Assange ist eigentlich heute am 15. Oktober seit 11 Jahren und 314 Tage in England festgehalten. Er ist seit 3 Jahren und 190 Tage in Belmarsh, weil er Kriegsverbrechen publiziert hat. We have seen in Ithaka the worldwide support for Julian Assange. We should also remember the number of prizes he was awarded. Hello, John. I have just introduced you and Richard, and I have more or less opened the floor for people to ask you and Richard some question. So, John Shipton, the father of Julian Assange, and Richard Medhurst, journalist and political commentator.
If the UK should extradite Julian Assange, will you go to the European Court for Human Rights to fight this decision?
Of course, every opportunity to resist the United States' extradition will be taken. But please to keep in mind that all of the court cases are in some sense farcical. They are weapons utilized in the persecution of Julian. They are not court cases. They are tools in the oppression and intimidation and attempted destruction of Julian. I'll just add that as an example to what will happen to you if you offend the United States or the United Kingdom. Essentially, WikiLeaks is a European publication. It was first registered in France. First court case to allow publication was in France, and all of the publications, the major publications, were Der Spiegel, El País, Le Monde, Guardian. Only the New York Times was outside of Europe. We understand from that it is a repression of information available to the European peoples.
I would be interested if there would be, in a technical sense, any role the Australian government could have played. I understand that Australia is part of the Five Eyes, and so the government might do more or less, I personally say, what the United States wants, but could they have done something?
Well, you know, as our calculation is acquiescence. If you say nothing, you're complicit. You helped. But recently there was an election, I think 3 months ago, and all of the successful candidates to Parliament and a successful government body, the Labour Party, which is Social Democrats, they were elected on Assange platform. The Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has promised to act to return Julian home. Equally, the Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus, has made the same declaration.
Mr. Shipton, what is the time frame now with Julian? What is the next thing time-wise you hoping for? Is there a set date, or are we just facing a very vague future?
The court cases seem interminable to me.
Yeah.
I think at 23 now, 24, but we are waiting on the High Court to allow an appeal to the High Court. The United States has until the 31st of October to submit their points resisting the appeal. That's the next step in the legal calendar. But again, it's a political case. Julian fights all of the court cases in order to continue to be able to fight politically. If I could just do, to give you some idea, Austria was the first nation state to issue as official government policy support of Julian Assange 2.5 years ago. Then followed the Council of Europe, then the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and now every parliament in the European theatre has a cross-party Assange group in it. The last one, about a month ago, was Luxembourg. The Bundestag voted to put Julian Assange on the agenda of the United States and German friendship group. So now it's an official matter for the Bundestag to discuss with the United States. I think that happened about 3 weeks ago. In the South American theatre, the President of Colombia is a supporter. The President of Chile is a supporter. The Vice President of Argentina is a supporter. The next President of Brazil, Lula, is a supporter. The President of Mexico invited Gabriel and I to Mexico for the independence celebration a month ago, and offered Julian the key to Mexico City. He also trolled the Americans in the most amazing way, saying that should the persecution of Julian, the extradition of Julian to the United States happen, then the United States must return the Statue of Liberty to France, because there's no liberty in the United States.
As an American living abroad in Austria, I know that there is a large election coming up in November, and I want to ask, do you think the votes of Americans matter in Julian's case, or does this go deeper than our democracy?
Well, there's no question it goes way deeper than any notion of democracy. I think you all saw in the film that there was an anonymous political advisor that Stella, Julian's wife, contacted to try and lobby Trump to draw up a pardon. And where was the pushback from? The pushback was from the, whatever you want to call it, deep state, national security state, it doesn't matter. It's the intelligence agencies. It's the people who don't get elected and who are always there in the background. And these are the people who spied on Assange in the embassy. And Trump's Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, basically confirmed that when he said that the sources in the Yahoo News story should face prosecution. Well, if they were lying, why would you prosecute them? So, he kind of inadvertently confirmed that the CIA was spying on him. They were contemplating assassinating him. So it's also worth noting that if Assange is extradited, there's the question of what prison conditions will he be placed in? And some of the most restrictive are known as SAMs. So these are special administrative measures, basically solitary confinement. And it's not just the Attorney General in the US who decides whether you're put in SAMs. The CIA has input, and Julian Assange published CIA documents. So, this idea that he would get there and then a Democratic administration or Republican administration would treat him differently, it's just unrealistic. One of the arguments in court was that there was a consensus in the Obama administration that, Assange shouldn't and couldn't be prosecuted, because if they went after him, they would have to go after the New York Times, all the outlets that used his juicy journalism and profited off of that. And then, of course, with Trump, because Trump has Mike Pompeo, he's the CIA director, and he's got John Bolton, and he's surrounded by all these neocons, and he, of course, himself shares responsibility. They leave this idea behind and create a new precedent, and they say, you know what, we're going to go after Assange with the Espionage Act. And what did the Biden administration do? You also saw that in the film. The Biden administration just picked up the tab and is running with it. So that proves to you that whether you have a Republican or a Democratic administration, there is literally zero difference whatsoever. And the proof is that they are pursuing the case. So if there were a difference, they would have dropped it. And it's interesting because most of the people in Biden's administration were actually there in the Obama administration. So I don't know where the change of heart comes from. I just think that they kept a lot of Trump foreign policy decisions, whether it's about Syria, it's about Yemen, and one of those foreign policy decisions was criminalizing journalism, extraterritorializing U.S. law, and going after Assange, who's Australian and has never lived, has never worked in the U.S. And as John just pointed out, WikiLeaks did most of the publishing in Europe. So it's an attack on press freedoms worldwide, and I don't think the midterms is going to affect that, unfortunately.
The newspapers that published the leaks for which Julian Assange is now accused, how did they do they share the campaign? Do they do anything in support of Julian, or if they don't, how do they justify it? Are you in contact with them? Did you press them to join the campaign for liberation?
Well, it's 13 years of unscrupulous slander, lies and calumny. And the newspapers have participated in that, abandoning their source, abandoning WikiLeaks. But lately, progressively, they've come to understand that setting a precedent like this exposes them to the same sort of prosecution. And so the New York Times wrote an editorial supporting Julian, and as did the Washington Post, as did Le Monde, Der Spiegel, and The Guardian. That's lately. So with the determination of the United Kingdom and the United States to repress and intimidate, oppress publication, and consequently our knowledge, there seems to be a reason for it. There seems to be that states, particularly those two states, feel now insecure, because only at the time a state feels insecure does it enact those sort of regulations. And we can see with Liz Truss is on the verge of collapse. It's only been in government for a month. And Mr. Forgettable name really, Mr. Johnson spent most of the time drunk. And it was a very lazy Prime Minister. And in the UK system, the Prime Minister has to be active, otherwise the government, falls to pieces and becomes ragged, as it has done. So one can see the efforts to preserve the United Kingdom from centrifugal forces from exploding. by repression of commentary. But I'll just add one little comment. In the United Kingdom, what you might want to call alt media or new media, I call new media, is very, very vigorous, very lively, and contains most of the information that you'd ever want to read to understand what that government is doing and how the distance between the polity, that's us, and the actions of government has now reached a credibility gap. Some people make the joke that the only thing now you can trust the government for is that when you come up to the green traffic light, the other one is red. That's all you can trust them for. So we make that joke to, understand that we are often misled these days.
I would like to know what we all can do to help to get him free.
Okay, this is a good question. And there's three principal elements. One is that every parliamentarian has two telephones, one at the office in the electorate or in his constituency, and another one in the parliament. Ring them up. Just ring them and say, you want this Assange matter settled. Or if they're a supporter already, thank you very much, and give encouragement. That's one. The other is to form a small group and use social media to put your views to each other, to start a conversation. The conversation grows. The French Facebook group has 45,000 members. The German Facebook group has 50,000 members. The limitations of our will require solidarity and growth and organisation are evident to us. Julian has supporters, millions worldwide. Now we have a government in Australia actively, the head of that government, actively negotiating with the United States to bring Julian home.
I would also suggest that you consider joining vigils. There's one in Vienna every Wednesday next to the opera from 5 to 7 in the evening.
I know this.
If we are more, it will be more impressive for whoever is in government. You can also sign some support letters that we have and write to Julian Assange himself to lift his morale. And with that, I stop and give the floor to the next
Can I just make the point here? I have been working on this for 3 years. Okay. Since that time, every single parliament in the European theatre has an Assange group in its parliament in 3 years. The Austrian government was the first state, the first national state, to issue support to Julian. Okay. The first one was here, and that's 2.5 years ago. And now we have heads of state negotiating with the United States to bring Julian back to Australia.
First of all, I just wanted to congratulate you on a very moving film, and it was very powerful. And I admire you for your untiring energy and devotion in doing what you're doing, and also trying to get that balance in your life between your own family and this one, and all the efforts for Julian. My question is really just very simple. Is Julian getting the medical attention in Belt&Road prison that he needs, both on physical and mental issues? Is there somebody monitoring that? That's my question.
Yes, he is getting the attention and has access to independent medical doctors. Yeah. Just you know, just a general comment. After 1945, all of the people of the world gathered together and set up 4 magnificent civil artifacts. The first one was the United Nations, which allowed states to negotiate between themselves without going to war, to act with each other through laws. The second one was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. 1948, a man named Herbert Bear Everett, who was an Australian, the first president of the United Nations, and Eleanor Roosevelt. The second one in 1958 was the Conventions of Asylum. That's the third, sorry. The Conventions of Asylum. Then was the reinforcement of the Geneva Conventions. Finally, the English contribution from many years ago, I think 800 years ago, was placing a shield of law between the state and the citizen. A shield of laws between the state and the citizen. And we call that due process, where each side has to be equally armed. All of those wonderful, magnificent civil structures have been abandoned in the case of Julian Assange. Abandoned. And in the case of many others too, but principally taking Julian as an example. So we fight to renew and reinstitute these glorious civil artifacts. And as a consequence, we also fight for Julian. Both things are the same. So it's well to remember that in fighting for Julian Assange, we also benefit ourselves, our communities, our nations, and the health of our nations in relationship to the other nations and other states.
Mr. Shipton, I just wanted to let you know that I'm feeling very honored having you standing here in front of us and answering our questions. Also, Mr. Medhurst, thank you very much. This is indeed very, very special and very important nowadays in those times. Please keep your smiling eyes, even when you're crying. Those are giving all of us kind of a hope that there is something to believe in. I just wanted to ask you, in light of what's happening with Julian and with what's happening with our world in general, the war in Ukraine, all the wars, you know, previous wars in Syria and so on and so forth, is there a hope for our world?
If there is any, semblance of good, then Julian's part of that. I think it's very different when you read. I gave the example earlier when we were speaking with John about the collateral murder video when that helicopter is shooting the Reuters journalists and the Iraqi civilians. Like that event was already known before. It was talked about, like it was published, but you just had like a brief synopsis of what happened. But then when the video came out and you could hear the pilots laughing while they're shooting people and you can see the people being killed, it gives a new dimension to, because you can see it and you can hear it. And that is just one example of, the things that WikiLeaks published. There's so many others. We'd be here all night and we wouldn't get through half of them. And so, that is basically bringing government crimes into the light. And Julian's paying the price for that. And this is one of the only things that you can do, because otherwise these crimes would stay in the dark, and you can't really change the policies. Now, even in the film, they talked about how protesting before the Iraq War didn't do much. And I remember those protests, seeing them on TV, and it is very, disappointing that it didn't do anything. So, the other things that we can do is investigative journalism, national security journalism, just talking about these really heinous international crimes that are committed in Western governments' names, because they're the center of power today. They have all the means, and if you don't want to do it yourself, at least support the ones who do, like Julian. So I think that's one of the few antidotes that we have, I would say.
I've never been much good on pessimism, but I'll try and answer. There's 250,000 cables in the cable set, 400,000 in the Iraq war files, 90,000 in the Afghan war files. I'll give you a couple of examples of the result. In 2008, a group of American soldiers went into a house outside of Baghdad and murdered the family, the mum and the dad of the babies and uncles, aunties. And then, contemplating that they'd get into trouble for this heinous crime, they called it an airstrike and obliterated all of the remnants of that little family from the earth. That was reported by the United States ambassador to the State Department in Washington. Released as a cable by WikiLeaks, it was read by the Iraqi parliamentarians who managed, that poor destroyed country, managed to get enough courage, enough fortitude to gather together and say to the United States, we're not signing the Status of Forces Agreement, which subsequently meant that the United States and its allies, to my shame, my country was one, had to remove their forces from Iraq. That is, a league ended a war. On a more heartening note, in Astana, just last week, they had Astana as the capital, as in Kazakhstan. They had a meeting last week. 27 countries attended that meeting. Lavrov is the foreign minister of Russia, went to Africa. 45 nations of African heads of state and foreign ministers met with him. So it's because I'm a Westerner and I hear the West quite loudly, but there's lots doing, the Belt and so following the efforts of the Soviet Union to spread industry all around. So, for example, in Kyrgyzstan, the submarine engines were made. Well, Kyrgyzstan, as you know, is landlocked. It's got no submarines. It's got a river, a couple of lakes, but the Soviet Union attempted to take technique, technology, understanding university. In Tashkent, there were 9 universities, more than that's in Vienna. So attempted, the Chinese have taken up that idea and attempting to, with Belt and Road, to develop all of the Eurasian states, give the opportunity to develop so that they can have what we have, dentistry, MRIs, CAT scans and things like that. The problem is, and any historian here will know, so make just, I don't want to make this too long. In the 30 Years' War, which is still, its effects are still felt in in Central Europe, the effects of the 30 Years' War. Well, from Afghanistan to the border of Turkey, they've had nothing but wars for 45 years. And as the young men, I meet them in the travels, they don't know anything other than shooting people or shooting other young men. And so, with the development of industry and universities and schools, it gives the opportunity for those states to build. And China is supplying the money and the intellect, the organisation. Yeah. So it's not all stinky, you know. It's a little bit here and there. Also, in Africa is reasserting itself. So you remember, well, you wouldn't remember, but we remember that the decolonisation of Africa after the war, and we had Jules Nyerere and Nkomo and Dag Hammarskjöld. Oh, I'll finish with this. Dag Hammarskjöld was president of the, as you know, president of the United Nations, and asked, well, what about the United Nations? Well, you know, what are they going to do? And he replied, they won't take us to paradise, the United Nations, but they will save us from hell. Yeah. It's pretty good out there.
I wanted you to ask about the role of the UK in all of this, because it seems to me from watching the movie that they go rather hard on Julian, like having him in this high security prison, like it could have been also maybe in the normal prison and better conditions that he's being under. So I feel like they've made themselves a complicit to the UK, to the US, and I wonder why that is. Why they don't like to have a more of a neutral or a neutral ground image, because I feel it also really damages the image of the UK, because it tells a lot about a country, about how they treat their prisoners, and it don't really make a good impression on me. So I was just wondering if you could elaborate on the UK's role and their rationale about how they're behaving.
Okay, I'll share with Richard an answer. You remember the Nuremberg Code says that if you commit a crime, you can't say somebody told me to do it. You committed the crime. It's the same with the United Kingdom. They are not proxy for the United States. We have the documentary record of the Crown Prosecuting Service conspiring with the Swedish prosecuting authority to keep Julian in jail. So the answer is yes. They are principals in this persecution of Julian Assange. The reasons are that they want to establish control over what the public reads. The reason for that is that they are insecure and involved in crime. The white helmets, for example. You know, what else? The Colonial and Foreign Office granted £246 million to companies interested in tipping over the Syrian government in one way or another. They donated £65 million to the ruination of civil life in Lebanon. So they're just involved in crime after crime. They just blew up North Stream. That's why they oppress media of the quality of Julian Assange. So they are complicit.
Yeah, I'll just add to what John said, that there is no there's the real media in the UK. They're garbage, dishonest, and they are the quintessential example of state media is in the UK. You know, they cover up all these. You know, John just listed a few crimes like these cutouts, these intelligence fronts they had in Syria. So basically, regime change. You know, they're pouring millions of pounds into fake news, into weapons, and this is criminal activity, right? So there are, of course, all the I don't know what to call the relationship. It's not really a relationship. It's the dynamic of the former British Empire and the quote-unquote former colonies, right? So Britain is still active in a lot of these places, you know, in Asia, in Africa, in the Middle East, and the recent sabotage in Ukraine, the Crimea Bridge. I mean, the Ukrainian foreign minister just admitted to that this morning, which is incredible. But obviously, you know, this wasn't done alone. You have British and American support. So there's so many things ongoing all the time they don't want people to find out about. And this is very difficult to reconcile with the idea of a democracy, because if you have a democracy, you would have a free press and an independent judiciary, and you don't have that in the UK. You know, John and myself, we've been in the courtroom many times, and every single day, every time we were in the courtroom, we did not see an independent judiciary. We saw, you know, a judge and prosecutors that are basically acting as errand boys for the Americans. U.S. extraterritorialization of their law in a British courtroom in London. So, you know, sorry, I don't know your name, but you very eloquently pointed out that yes, they are complicit in what the Americans are doing. We can speculate about many reasons. I think it's of course, one part is that the UK is part of the Five Eyes, so Canada, Australia, New Zealand, US. They share intelligence with the Americans. I think there's also some sense of, you know, they want to be loved by the Americans who have all the power now, is that there was a transfer of power from, you know, Whitehall to Washington, and the British Empire is it's just not what it used to be 100 years ago. So there's this need to be in good with the Americans and do whatever they want, and they're absolutely complicit. I mean, the example of Belmarsh is very good. You know, why are you putting a non-violent journalist who is not serving a sentence in a maximum security prison? What? You know, they put people from Al-Qaeda in that prison, which have, by the way, those guys, like Abu Qatada, they got bail, but they won't give Julian bail. So, you know, the British government is more lenient with people in Al-Qaeda than they are with Julian Assange. What is that?
Al-Qaeda's paid by them.
Yeah. So, you know, of course that makes sense when you understand why Al-Qaeda exists and so on, and you know, what Western foreign policy has done. But the British government is absolutely complicit. There's no question about it. And I think the message in the film that this is also a political trial is very important to understand, because hoping for justice from the courtrooms is just not going to cut it. You know, they're trying to character assassinate Julian. They're trying to take the spotlight and the focus away from his work. And, you know, if we did have an honest media, they would keep the British government in check. They don't do that. They just ride along with them and make things worse. And it's just not looking good for their records. But you know, that's why we need movies like this, and why we have to come and speak out about this, because legacy and mainstream media are not going to do it. They're just working with the government, and I would just add one last thing. It's not just the British government. You have the Swedish government as well. Many governments around the world, and the Australian government up until recently, in cahoots with the Americans, and so that needs to be highlighted and pointed out. And it's very good that you raised that.
G'day, John and Richard. What do you see the difference between the treatment of Julian Assange and the treatment of Chelsea Manning? Because she was also responsible for providing the information, and then she was prosecuted, and then her sentence was commuted, I believe. So what, in your eyes or in your opinion, do you believe is the principal difference between the treatment of Chelsea Manning and the treatment of Julian Assange?
Well, I'll just hand it over to John quickly. I'll just say that, Chelsea Manning, as a whistleblower, they tried to make an example out of Chelsea, and they're trying to do the same thing out of Assange. The idea is to deter whistleblowers by punishing Chelsea, and then to deter journalists by punishing Julian. I think some people would say that, well, Chelsea got the sentence commuted, and that's the biggest difference until now. But I think the word commuted shows that this wasn't a pardon. It was basically just like, yeah, I still think the Obama administration was basically saying, I still think you were guilty and you're a traitor, but I'm just going to commute the sentence. And that's wrong, of course, because it doesn't do justice to the crimes that she revealed. And when it comes to Julian, I mean, I struggle to see a lot of difference, because they're both being persecuted, and prosecuted, and it's really all about making an example out of them. And the fear is that this goes on forever, because with Chelsea, she had the trial, and then she got out of prison, but then they summoned a grand jury and threw her back into jail, and then she paid off the fine. And with Assange, I think they're just trying to keep it going as long as possible, so they don't actually have to convict him. They can just keep bouncing him around courts, one jurisdiction to the next, which they said in those emails. And that is very, very disheartening. But I'll hand it over to John.
Yeah, good question. Let's say that Chelsea broke some laws, which she did, in the public interest, and received a sentence, and that sentence was commuted. So it bundles up neatly. With Julian, he understood the dynamics of the internet. He also understood that the mass, the mass, can contribute to analysis and form groups to do analysis using the internet and using the documents that you hold on the internet. So you see, the result of that is, say, for example, the Chagos Islanders are all taken away and dumped in Mauritius. This was recorded in the cables. Their solicitors and lawyers read the cables, and with the encouragement of the Chagos Islanders, took the United Kingdom to the Court of International Justice and prevailed. The United Kingdom appealed and failed, so they prevailed. So you can see that you can continue to analyse, to use that facility that Julian invented. And so I imagine that they just don't want that to continue, and they want to make Julian an example. So I see, that's what I see. I just delight in the extraordinary understanding that Assange had back then, that you could combine those things, that you could protect a source using Tor, you could hold the documents up on a notice board forever, and that people could form groups and do their own analysis. Another example of that is that when Rafael Correa was first elected president, he had a problem. And the work was that the elite of the police force in Ecuador were loyal to the United States Embassy, and that was the problem. But then they read the cables concerning Ecuador, and it revealed that the United States Embassy paid the elites paid the elite police their wages, lifting their income to double that of all the other police in Ecuador. So Rafael knew the source of the problem from the cables and came up with a solution. Can you imagine what the solution was? He increased the wages of all the policemen to the level of the elite. so consequently had a stable government. There's a couple of reasons there.
I would like to ask Mr. Christian Stöger, Vice President of the Austrian Journalist Club, to come to the floor.
Thank you very much. We're very glad and proud to have you both here. And we as an Austrian Journalist Club will continue to support you in the fight. We will not be quiet. We will raise attention and we will speak to our members. We will, I would not say force them, but gradually force them to keep the memory alive, that the memory that he is still in prison, and this should not go on. Thank you, and I want to give you something to remember your stay here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's been wonderful. This is my 7th trip to Vienna, and each time it's a marvelous success. The first trip, I came with Savin Dagdelin, who's from the Bundestag, and we spoke to officers of the foreign ministry privately, and then some months later the Austrian government issued a statement of support. You cannot ask for more. So that was great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you. It was great to see you here, to have you answer the questions. I know there are people who would like to ask more questions, but unfortunately we have to vacate the room at 8 sharp. There's only one more thing that I would like to state. If there is a donation box over there, if you feel like supporting, then we would ask you to support for the costs of the film and the event and all that. And outside we will have a letter of support to request the British government to free Julian Assange and not extradite him to the US. It's a support to letters that Candles for Assange wrote earlier this year to the former Prime Minister, Mr. Johnson, and we are now addressing it to the Right Honourable Prime Minister of the UK. So that whoever it may be, and the more signatures we collect, and we send those support letters every week to 10 days, the 10 Downing Street receives a letter.
I want to make a personal mention of Barbara Mister, who we've corresponded with for years and has always been very encouraging, and thanks to the Press Club for everything.